Well, hey, how are you doing today? We are back at it. It's your girl, Miss Straight Talk, no sugar added, none added at all, as we continue this process of the 16 video series that I'm doing on Who's Your Baggage, Releasing the Dead Weight. And the next couple of videos that I'm going to do, well, what I'm doing today is we're talking about grief. And grief, I would think, um, along with depression and abuse, are really difficult subjects for people to talk about, especially if you either have not gone through it yourself or you have not experienced it at the level that someone else has experienced it. And so, one of the things I want to say in the onset of this video, again, as I've done in others, is I am not a licensed therapist. Uh, I am just here to have a conversation about these, what I call bricks of life, things that hold us down and keep us from moving forward. And that's something I'm going to talk about in this video is the words moving forward, because it seems to be something that people who are experiencing grief hear from people from time to time. They may not say it in those exact words, but they say it in certain phrases. And one of the things that I want to make sure that I am very clear on is that I am not minimizing your experience or the experience that someone you may know is going through grief. As I said, I'm just attempting to have a conversation to possibly, offer, a glimmer of light, a glimmer of hope to say, hey, you know what, these are some steps that I can do for myself to continue to um, deal with or accept the loss that I have experienced while still finding that path to move on to move on in life. And so a lot of times when we talk about grief, we think about it in the sense of a loss of a loved one, but we can grieve for any type of life changing event. Any type of life changing event can be grieving. When we think about when we went through the pandemic, and even if you did not lose a loved one, excuse me, during that period of our time, um, there were many of us grieving the change of life overall, especially when we were having to wear masks, we were isolated to our homes, we could not go to work, we had to adapt to doing everything online. And that itself was a grieving process because life as we knew it had changed, and we had to, in this sense, move forward. We had to say, okay, this is what has to be done to get on with this next phase of life, because life as we knew it prior to March of 2020 will not be the same. And so we can grieve just about anything. It's when something impacts us in a very detrimental way, and we are trying to navigate on how do we still especially if it's a loss of a loved one, how do we still honor that person while still kind of getting through life? And so I'm going to have an interchangeable type conversation um, to those who are experiencing grief and those who are to be the support of those who are grieving. And so this is not any information of my own because, as I said, I'm not a therapist. And so I have a couple of resources where I've gathered from Choose Therapy and then Julie Manuel of the Kettering Health Behavioral Medical Center. So these are resources that I have found online that I'm using to have a conversation. So again, these are not my words. And if it's something that I'm interjecting, I will state that this is my thought or my experience. So one of the things that I thought that I found where it says the phrase "moving on" is common, but it isn't very well understood. And so I think for the person who is grieving, when they hear the words "moving on," that they're assuming or that there's a suggestion being made, hey, like just toss that feeling away, get on with it, and just let's do life. And then the person who's saying it is looking at the person, and this is my um, explanation, my perspective of it. The person who is actually saying, you have to move on. In most instances, what that person is doing is they're saying, hey, I don't like to see you this way. I see that the situation has caused life to change for you. And I want to see you in a better place. So that would be a perspective to look at when you hear someone say, move on. And then sometimes it's not so gentle, but you can determine based off of the relationship you have with that person how that is. So when you see me reading something, this is from the information I got from online. So one of the things that it says here is you are not responsible for how others feel about your grief process. Typically, it feels like those around us mean by moving forward is for us to stop hurting, stop talking about it, stop remembering, stop crying, and just stop grieving. And so that is a very good point. It says we are not responsible for how others feel about our grief. And while the people outside of us mean well, they're not in the trenches of that experience like you are. And so it's not up to you to have a responsibility about how they feel about your grieving process. You have to take whatever tools and insight that you have received from your therapist, hopefully if you're getting grief counseling, or from a religious counselor, to how to move forward. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. And so sometimes I think, and I've seen it in personal experiences, that especially when I was growing up, counseling wasn't as prevalent as it is today. And sometimes, I've experienced where I've seen people, feel like, they're telling me to move on. They just want me to forget about the person. How can I forget about them? But I say this, and this is my own personal perspective. Um, when I lost my father, and this was many years ago, when I lost my father, I had to, the way that I was able to process moving on was I said, would my father want me to be in this state of not moving forward, of not getting on with my life? And knowing the relationship that we had, I know that he would not have wanted me to be that way. Again, with my mother, when she passed away a few years ago, my mother was about life. My mother was not about sitting, and sulking. And I'm not saying that grieving is sulking, but these were her words. um, she wanted us to remember her as she was and how she wanted us to live when she was alive. And so she had every conversation with us about, you know, getting on with life, and that's not where she, wanted us to be. And so you really have to look at the relationship and the connection you have with that person. And I believe that when we understand, and I personally understand when people transition to the other side, that there's so many stories that I've heard of people who have died and then they've come back and they tell such marvelous stories about what's happening on the other side, and many of them don't want to come back. They feel bad for us. And so while what we're grieving is that person no longer being a part of our life, and we understand, especially if someone has been ill for a very long time, when you understand that that person doesn't really want to suffer anymore. And so another thing that says, moving on doesn't mean the end of grief. Doesn't mean the end of grief. There have been, people, for instance, I just mentioned my parents, and my father, has been gone since like 1992, and my mom since 2017. And there are moments that I experience a form of grief because, there are things that they're missing or things that they experience that they're not here to experience. And I wish they would hear. There were things that I took for granted, with my mom. And I wish I was that she was still here for me to kind of glean that information and that insight that she had, and I don't have that. And so I have those moments, but then I say to myself, you know what? But at the end of the day, I believe that they are proud of who I am, and let me step out of this moment. And so moving on doesn't mean it's the end of grief. And then ultimately, you get to define what moving on means to you. What moving on means to you can be different what it means for someone else. And the thing that I want to say for people who may be watching this video, who may be on the peripheral, on the outside of someone experiencing grief, um, that you just have to know that how they deal with things is a lot different than how you deal with things. Now, saying all of what I just read, at the end of the day, if someone is experiencing severe bouts of grief where it's leading into depression, then then it is the responsibility of the people outside of that person to help to nudge that person to have a conversation with a professional. So hopefully you have allowed yourself to take on some grief counseling so that you can get to where you need to be, because you don't want to carry um, that around and not live your own life. So then there were a couple of things that Julie Manuel said about grief, and what I just talked about, how do you process and a plan to get through. And she mentioned something called the 3 C's: choose, connect, and communicate. And I'll just briefly run through those. It says connect. Uh, Grief intensifies feelings of loneliness, which often leads to isolation. It's difficult, important not to remove yourself from others' lives. So really, it is important to stay connected, because it's really good for people to watch your behaviors to see if anything is shifting. And it's really good um, for your internal, that you feel that people are supporting you and you get to hear other people's insight and take on what it is that you need. So when you isolate, you stay within your own thoughts and your own reason, and everything seems to be normal within that. And that's not good. But then she says to communicate, um, put your needs out there. If there's something that you need from the people in your life, state it. Don't feel like people don't want to be there for you. Um, Communicate. Say what it is that you need, and let them know if it's going to be uncomfortable to ask for what's needed. But then ask for it, and then communicate however you can to your friends and family. It will help let them know how to best come alongside you, because people can't help you if they don't know what it is that you need. And then here's what I want to close with this, with the people who are uh, dealing with someone or have someone who is going through a grieving period. Here are some things that I found where it says key points to remember when communicating with someone who is grieving. Express your condolences simply and honestly. Say, I'm sorry for your loss, or my thoughts are with you. And I know it seems like it's so cliche, and it seems like, oh, everybody is saying that, but we don't really know what to say when someone is going through this. So that's just enough. That's just enough, because it's our human nature to want to do something, to want to help. But saying that is just, sometimes at that point, it's really just enough. And ask open-ended questions. And I've had to learn this recently. Ask open-ended questions, because I've had some friends and some close people who experience death. And instead of asking how you doing, like, that's obvious. How are they doing? They're sad. They're upset. They're grieving. There's a lot. So how are you doing is really not an appropriate question. So I started asking, so what is today? What's going on today? How is today coming along? What are your thoughts today? And then just kind of just talk to them, because sometimes they want to talk about the person that's deceased, and sometimes they don't. You just kind of have to feel the temperature, and then just say, you know what, I'm just checking in. I'm just checking in. Just keep it simple, because when they're ready, they will open up. Actively listen, validate their feelings, offer practical help. Sometimes, people just might need an errand run, or, you know, feed their pet, whatever. It could be just something simple, because when someone is grieving, the simplest things is even getting out of bed is very tough to do. So to even bring someone breakfast or bring dinner can make a difference. Um, and then here's another thing. Avoid the cliches. Phrases like everything happens for a reason or time heals all wounds. That does not work, with folks because um, you don't know that. You don't know that. And so that doesn't help. And check in on them regularly. And so, I want to have this conversation because it is a part of my 16 series, and it is something that does weigh people down from moving forward. And as I stated in the beginning, if you are that person who has been experiencing the grief of something, a loss of job, loss of a loved one, loss of anything that has impacted you in such a way that doesn't allow you to move forward in life, then I do encourage you to seek counseling. If you are employed, most employers offer the employee assistance program. So um, I do recommend that you look into that because it is my desire with these videos that I don't want another person to go another month, another day, another month into another year, just feeling like they can't live life and they can't live their best life. So I trust that you've gotten some nuggets from this, and hopefully on both sides, whether it's for the person that's grieving or their support system, you have to find ways to really support, one another. The person grieving, you can support your friends and family by operating in the 3 C's because now they know how to help you. And then the person who's on the outside assisting the person who's grieving, you have to know that you can't help them um, in the way that you would like to. You just have to be there for them and be that catalyst that helps them to kind of move forward. So, hope you found something in this. I would really love to hear your comments. Please like and share, subscribe so that you can get the little bell when other videos come up. I could be found on social media at Miss Straight Talk, no sugar added, and at Miss Straight Talk. At Miss Straight Talk or at Miss Straight Talk, no sugar added, and on my website at bestraightup.com. So I hope that you found something valuable with this, and thank you so much for your time and thank you for watching. Take care. Bye bye.